Don Catcher here with another random monologue. The difference between shame and being ashamed. This is something that I've had a struggle with, mainly because I didn't understand the difference, and it's still something that I have to fight with, but God's helping me through it. When we read the first few chapters of Genesis, and we look at the relationship that God established in purity and how matehood was originally supposed to be, there was no shame in it whatsoever. Not one bit. Pure, innocent, holy, a very beautiful thing. And then shame, and then becoming ashamed because of lust and other things, that because of sin, because of wrongfulness and harmfulness. It changed things. Because of a lot of the conflicts in my life, and because of the things that I've gone through, that have happened in my life, that I've witnessed, the relationship between mates and or husband and wife, so forth and so on, has been a curious and conflicting study to me until I really started to understand what the Bible has to say about it. For one thing, the Bible doesn't talk about sexuality. It talks about the difference between faithful, pure love and sensuality. The two are very different things. 2, it talks about the difference between adultery and fornication and those that deal it out or partake of it or are ensnared by it, and those that are in a godly, loving, pure, coveted and committed, as in covenanted and committed relationship. Those are very, very different things. Very different things. The Bible uses terms like to lay with one another, to go into one another, to know one another. And those are very different types, for the most part, of intimacy. From what I've studied, and I'm open for correction if it is truly sound and truly biblical, but from what I've seen, laying with one another pretty much always indicates either fornication or adultery, or some form of unclean, lustful desire. And the same thing with shaming and humbling that comes along with that. And the type of discovering and the type of discovery that comes along with that. You've got to remember, they were writing in a different time, in a different place, from a completely different mindset than the Western mindset. If you look at the scriptures through a Western mindset, you're going to miss a lot of what the scripture has to say. The Lord chose the Middle Eastern Jewish mindset to tell His way of things for a reason. Because the Western mindset is a different mindset than his. Even the Western mindset, once healed, still comes out of a pagan mindset. Even though the Western mindset has been healed for the most part, some of it is still that pagan mindset, even though people don't realize that. And when you look at it from a Middle Eastern viewpoint that is pure and God-founded, it is completely different than a Western mindset that is God-founded. So please keep all that in consideration. But, like I said, laying together and the humbling and shaming that comes along with it is completely different than to go into one's spouse or to know one's spouse, someone that they have covenanted and committed their heart and soul and mind and spirit and body in relation to, first in honor to God and reverent on respect to Him, that He is giving this individual to them to love and respect and honor as unto God. And second, to the person. That is a completely different way than laying with someone and knowing someone just in a physical way. And when you realize that, and you read the scripture with that original context, it shows a completely different picture of physical intimacy. But it also shows a completely different picture of what a godly relationship, period, is to be. For one thing, only those that were in committed relationships were supposed to be physically intimate with each other. And that type of committed, covenanted relationship. It's supposed to be something that is God-centered and God-honoring. And if it's not that, you need to be careful that you're not counted among the whoremongers and the adulterers and the fornicators. The things I've went through have caused me to have a great deal of shame when it comes to my body. When it comes to anything of physical intimacy, because people treated me like a whore. Plain and simple. I need to be blunt and put it out there. I don't know of a single person out there that understood God's way of loving another person when it comes to that. And a lot of them, much less, period. Because the world is so confused. And people are being deceived and deceiving themselves. And the kind of things I grew up in, even though not completely, I'm very thankful that the Lord had, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather and, a handful of aunts and uncles, that even though my grandmother and my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother were God-fearing, but some of my aunts and uncles weren't completely at the time. They're changing now, but some of them weren't completely at the time. But they didn't harm me in the way that those that were harming me and allowing others to harm me did. But I grew up under the false impression that And this is what adults taught me. And I'm not naming names. Those that did this, they know who they are. I forgive them, and I'm praying for their souls, and that they let God save them from themselves and from the others that have deceived them. Whether they're deceiving themselves as well or not. But I was taught that when you love someone, you let them have whatever they want from you, basically. You basically relinquish control. And that is a perversion. God is the only one that we are to relinquish control of ourselves to, because He's the only one that's not going to hurt us with that kind of power over us. No one else has that right. No one's husband, no one's wife, no one's father, no one's mother, no one's uncle, aunt, grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandmother, siblings, cousins, friends, so-called, or true, and are confused, have a right to have that power over one's body. Only God has that right. He's the only one that has first right to any of us, and He's not abusing it and misusing it. He wants to love and protect us and keep us safe from those that have or would or will, if we're not careful, misuse us, shame us, discover our nakedness to themselves or others. There's a big difference between naked as in nude and bare, and naked as in exposed and shamed. The naked that is first used in the Bible has to do with just being without clothes, just being bare, uncovered. The second has to do with shame, and has to do with being humbled, and has to do with being exposed in a way that is not healthy. There are two types of uncovering. There is an uncovering which is an unveiling, an openness, and a transparency that is pure and unto God. And then there is an uncovering and an unveiling that has to do with revealing things that aren't ours to reveal. And when studying Leviticus and the other books of the law that talk heavily about this kind of thing, when you see it say, don't uncover, don't discover, don't look upon such and such as nakedness, when it says those things, it's talking about something more, far more than just taking somebody's clothes off or taking your clothes off in front of another person. It is talking about exposing your purity and honor, or exposing someone else's purity and honor and taking that away from them. It is a harmful and unhealthy thing. And when people are not in committed, God-centered relationships that are God-fearing and God-loving relationships, that the love for each of the people in that relationship comes from them loving God first, and the people aren't committed in it, you have this to deal with. They end up shaming each other. So, with that, you come across everything that's going on today. Whether it's the stuff with the LGBTQI community, which continues to add letters, or you just see the immorality sexually, period, in pretty much every aspect of life. But people aren't going back and looking at what intimacy was in the eyes of God. The Bible talks a lot about pure intimacy, unadulterated intimacy that has nothing to do with fornication and adultery and lust. Talks quite a bit about it. But people get sidetracked on all of these other things and don't go back often to what God's already written out. You know, they puzzle over and they hunt over and they search and search over what the Bible talks about sexuality, what it talks about sexual preference, what it talks about gender, even though it does talk about gender, what it talks about relationships having to do with what is right and wrong as far as physical intimacy or relationships, period, whether relationships are right at all, whether to be physically intimate is right at all, and miss so much of it. God has prepared every soul for himself. Don't get that twisted. You know, yeah, he has first rights to every single soul. He is the creator of all. He is the father of all. He is brother to all that he has chosen. But don't get it twisted. Yeah, he would have a right to choose people for that. He has every right. But whoever said he did or would? But that's not the point here. The point is, he created the sanctity of a God-centered, God-loving relationship that is committed and was designed for those who he created to be together. And he takes joy and pleasure in them loving each other and them loving their children in a pure way. Pure relationships bring him much joy and much pleasure, and not in the way that perverts get off on watching pornography, or poor confused people get off on watching pornography. Not all people that watch pornography are perverts. Some of them are confused and don't understand what pure intimacy is, and they are hungry to be loved and hunger to be loved. And they're not being loved, so what do? They turn to what they think is love. But sorry, people. That's not love, that's lust. As in unclean desires. And that's where this shame comes from. When the scripture's talking about all that lying with each other and burning with lust for each other and discovering each other's skirts and nakedness and fountains of blood, that is unclean desire. That has to do with stepping outside of what is pure and holy and loving in a God-centered relationship, in a God-fearing relationship, in a God-loving relationship. And it causes the shame. And it causes abuses and misuses of each other. Let me ask you a very blunt question. If you've ever been intimate with someone, whether in a relationship or not, when you were intimate with them, did you make love to them to A, bring yourself pleasure, B, bring yourself pleasure, or 4, get off, and only get off? I'm sorry to put it that bluntly, but which did you do? And which is esteeming the other better? Or have you refused the one you're supposed to be in a committed relationship with pure intimacy? Do you use intimacy as a means to control other people? Do you use it as a means to manipulate other people? Whether withholding or giving of intimacy? Or are you addicted to being physically intimate with people? One must question why. All these things are issues that come out of unclean desires. And some of that comes straight out and simply from people being hurt and unloved and not knowing what love is. In that kind of relationship, when you make love to each other, it's making love to each other. It's not about what you're getting out of it. It's about what you can give. And that goes for more than just the physical part of it. That goes for the whole aspect of your relationship. You can make love to someone with it having nothing to do with physical intimacy. You can make love to someone with your words, with your smile, with your eyes, with the way you take out the trash even though you don't want to do it, with the way you wash dishes even though you don't want to do it, the way you clean the house, pay the bills, take care of the mortgage, wash the car, run errands, help take care of the children, walk the dog, feed the cat, clean the litter box, help clean the toilets. All of that. If you do that out of love for the other person, you're making love to them. But if you do any of that for self-gratification, it's no different than being physically intimate with them just to please yourself. What are your motivations in life, period? Are they just to please yourself? Are they to please others and get gratification for yourself only? Or are you out to please God? And then those God has given you to please. And then receive joy and pleasure. And all the other blessings that come with that. Because you put them first. And because that you love them more than you've ever loved yourself. But hopefully are learning to love yourself as God loves you through loving them. I'm having to learn all this stuff from scratch. God's my teacher. Yeah, I've had a little bit of help along the way with some godly examples, like my mama, my papa, my great-grandparents on my mom's side. And my uncle and aunt, next to the youngest uncle on my dad's side and his wife. The way their relationships were and are No, their relationships aren't perfect. Yes, they have the same things to deal with as everyone else. But God and loving Him and each other and loving one another and then loving others as well as God would have them to the best of their knowledge. That's what their relationships are built on. My mama and papa are past, but my aunt and uncle are not. And even though things aren't easy for them in some senses, and I'm not telling what senses, that's not mine to tell. That's their business. And, the Lord strengthen them and bless them through everything they go through. But, they're seeking to do their best as God would have them do. And they're loving God and each other through that. But most of the other relationships I see in the lives of my family members, with maybe the exception of one or two other family members, it's not the biblical model, much less the biblical pattern or example. I see them as different things, by the way. A model is just a starting point. The pattern is with the Lord and the church pattern. What's prescribed is between the people and God, and whatever falls into place between or mixed with both of those things. But I don't see that in hardly any of the relationships of the people I know. I see people using each other. And most of the time they don't even know it. And I don't understand why this is. And those that are believers do this without even knowing it, because of what society exemplifies. God's love is a selfless, pure, innocent, holy, childlike love. And for some reason, there is this misconception that you can't have that when it comes to physical intimacy. And so some people, they refuse to marry and force asexuality on themselves, whether God has designed them for that or not, because they've been hurt, or have seen others hurt, or heard of others hurt. But God created it pure and holy and innocent. Have you never seen or thought of the pure, innocent bond between children? What people call puppy love? Well, sometimes that's where that pure bond is meant to start. And it can grow. That pure, innocent love that has nothing to do with anything other than loving the other person. You love them just because your heart and soul are called to love them. I just don't understand why people think that they need to leave what is pure behind for what is not pure. Because what is pure, if allowed to grow, something more beautiful and more desirable than anything that the sex industry and the things that come out of the sex industry have to offer. Just things I needed to put out there. Things that I've struggled over and that the Lord's helping me to understand and consider, so that maybe the rest of you can dig too. And maybe all of us, as the Lord would have us, learn what He means for in all aspects of our relationships to other people, rather than doing it the way of the flesh, doing it in corruption, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Esteem others better than yourselves, guys. Provoke each other unto love and good works. Try not to compare each other amongst yourselves, because to do so is unwise. Well, I love you guys, and I'm praying for you guys, whether I know you or not. Lord bless and keep you. May His face shine upon you. May He help you and heal you and strengthen and guide you in all that He would have you do. Don't catch her out. Be blessed.